Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? Nintendo surprised everyone with its announcement of the NES Classic Mini. But is there more to it than they're letting on? So obviously, if you're not familiar with the NES Classic Mini, it's kind of what its name makes it sound like. It's a small miniature version of the original NES. Now, clearly it's not going to be a hardware clone of the original. It's tiny. It looks like it's probably about that big. And it's got all the games built into it. There's quite a number of original games. I would say a pretty decent selection, actually, surprisingly decent. But Nintendo says there's no options for expansion or downloading more games. They're all just built into the memory of the unit. What surprises me the most is that Nintendo would actually offer a product like this. Nintendo's really never done this sort of thing before. And they're kind of taking on after what a lot of the other clone hardware manufacturers have been doing recently. Devices like the Retron series, where it can emulate or play your old games, but it's got additional options for video out. We know that the Classic Mini is going to have an HDMI port on the back. We've also learned information like it's going to have different options for the video output in terms of, do you want scan lines, do you want pixel perfect mode, do you want video filters, that sort of thing. And it raises a lot of questions for me. And I think there's a lot of you out there as well who are kind of scratching their heads about this on multiple levels. The first question is, why would Nintendo even release a product like this? Generally, we see products that are licensed, made by third parties, not by the original manufacturer. They may license the original name, but they're those really kind of cheap system on a chip type of devices. I know I've seen versions of those, like the pluggable kind of devices, where it's all embedded in the controller. I've seen those for some of the original Atari systems, the Sega Genesis, stuff like that. It's kind of curious as to why Nintendo would want to get into that game themselves. Now, it is a bit heartening that they seem to be taking this hardware seriously. They could have gone that really cheap route where you've only got composite video output, you know, it's all built into the controller, that sort of thing. They seem to be at least building this with Nintendo quality hardware. If nothing else, Nintendo has generally been known for building really decent hardware, both in terms of the physical build quality, but also the technical design. They don't really cut corners too much. They have a vision, they stick to it. What I'm wondering is if Nintendo isn't trying to broaden its horizons. And I spoke about this a little bit in my episode on Pokemon Go. Go ahead and watch that one if you want to get a little bit more backstory. But I don't see this as having been something that Nintendo would have done even 3 or 4 years ago. To come out with a re-release console like this that, let's be honest, it's really meant to kind of prey on people's nostalgia. Obviously, the Wii U, at the time I'm filming this, hasn't done well. And sales of the 3DS and 2DS have been decent, but they're starting to trail off. There's a lot of hype coming up for NX. But it's clear that Nintendo is entering, I think, kind of a new era, with smartphone gaming becoming more prevalent and becoming more legitimate as a platform for gaming instead of just kind of the traditional time waster that it's always been. Pokemon Go has proven that there is, you know, a case for mobile smartphone gaming. But I wonder if Nintendo isn't starting to target other demographics other than what it traditionally has been targeting. Obviously, Nintendo wants to hit as wide of an audience as it can. And I think it's done a pretty good job at that. And in terms of the game selection, over the last maybe 10, 15 years, it's definitely tried to stay family friendly. You don't see that many, rated mature games on the Nintendo platforms. They do exist, but they're just not so common. So they're trying to go towards that family-friendly kind of angle. And they know that the majority of people who buy their systems are just kind of the average gamer. That's something that I think those of us who are really into gaming tend to forget a lot, is that the industry as a whole isn't really kept afloat by the hardcore gamers. It's by casual gamers. It's just by the people who they don't have a ton of time to devote to playing games. They don't have a ton of investment in playing games in terms of money and attitude and their attachment to it, I guess you could say, their mental attachment. The average gamer they just play it every once in a while when they have some free time, some time to kill, or they've got friends over, that sort of thing. And Nintendo seems to have been targeting kind of a younger audience so far. Pushing the envelope with the gameplay, continuing to invest in its franchises, but not necessarily preying on the whole nostalgia feeling. Of course, games have been available for Virtual Console for quite a while, and I think Nintendo's done a decent job of that, making them available, distributing them across multiple platforms. I know a lot of people have complaints about the way they've handled Virtual Console, but I honestly think they could have been doing worse. But I really think they're finally waking up to the fact that they can't continue business as usual. That they've got more... It was my turn, but I guess not. All right, I'm going now, if everyone's going to sit and stare at me. They can't just continue business as usual, because the trends have shown that business as usual, those trends have been kind of going downward. They do need to broaden their horizons. This, I think, is a really creative way for them to do so. But admittedly, it still is unexpected. I didn't think that they would want to release kind of a clone console. That said, are they going to sell the hell out of it? Absolutely. The timing of it is going to be perfect. It's coming out November of 2016. Perfect in time for the holidays. I can tell you this right now. I'm filming this in early August. It's going to be very difficult for them to keep those devices on store shelves. They, I think, are really going to strike a chord with a lot of casual gamers who are older, especially those who may have fallen out of gaming. Those who look at the current console generation and go, that's more money than I want to invest, or that's more time than I want to invest. They'll look at this and they'll look at its price tag of $60 US, which I think is probably spot on. And they'll look at the list of games and they'll go, boy, I remember most of these games from when I was a kid. And they'll remember that a lot of those games that they played were fun. And they'll have good memories and they'll go, $60, what the hell? And they'll pick one up. I think it's also going to have a really interesting effect on the used game market. Is it going to make things different for the real die-hard collectors? Probably not, but I do think it is going to deflate prices a bit. That said, I actually think maybe those prices could use some of that deflating. They do seem to have become artificially high for used game consoles, used cartridges themselves. One of my favorite games on the Genesis is Truxton, and if you follow Classic Game Room, pretty popular channel on YouTube, Mark Bussler, who runs that, is a big fan of Truxton as well, and I blame him for driving up the prices of Truxton, because I don't know where my copy of Truxton is. I have my original Genesis. I finally got that back from my sister. I don't know where my copy of Truxton is. It's probably still buried somewhere in the basement of her house, but I don't know. I've occasionally looked for a new copy of it. The prices for those are insane. And the prices for a lot of original NES games are insane. So I think seeing official manufacturer support for a device like this Classic Mini, where they've released it and said, this isn't some jank third-party product that you can pick up at Kmart for $19.99. This is like a real legit thing with solid build quality. I do think that's maybe going to play a factor in that whole retro game pricing market and the curve that those games go through as time goes on. The other thing that I'm really curious about is the hardware itself. It's very unlikely that it's going to be some kind of simple and cheap system on a chip type of design like we've seen with those generic kind of licensed ones. I do think there's going to be some real hardware involved here, but what that's going to entail, I think, is still somewhat up in the air. I had read some really interesting conjecture online where somebody had noticed that pretty much all those games were available as virtual console titles. All the games that came with it were available in the eShop for the 3DS platform. So there's a very good theory right there that the Classic Mini is really just a 2DS without the screen. Whether that's true remains to be seen. And I will tell you this, that device is cheap enough that I'm going to do my very best to get one on launch day and tear it down as soon as possible and get you a video about it, because I know I'm not the only one who's curious as to what's going on inside. But if it is really just running 2DS/3DS hardware on the inside, there could be a lot of potential for hacking involved of the software kind. It all depends on what hardware they leave in. Other interesting things that I've noticed about it, other than the whole they're going to be giving you options for video filtering and that sort of thing, and I think a lot of that, again, is to kind of prey on the nostalgia angle, try and give you as good of an experience as they can in terms of reminiscing, getting the game to look the way it did back in the 1980s when you played it on the big old wood console tube TV, that sort of thing. But I think it's also really interesting to see the way that they handled the controllers. That kind of speaks a lot as well. And that the controller ports in the front of the unit are the same as used on the Wii Nunchuck and the Wii Classic controller. Basically, any of the peripherals that plugged into the Wiimote. It's the same port. And it's, I believe, confirmed, if I remember correctly, that the Classic controller will work on the Classic Mini. So there's some extra controller support going on there that's curious. It's just curious that Nintendo decided to reuse that connector itself. Because using that connector implies that there's going to be some extra logic in the controller. That if Nintendo was really trying to build this down to a price, there are better ways of doing it. They could have made the remake of these classic controllers that are going to be shipping with it that look like the original NES controller. There are ways that they could have made those become incredibly cheap. But they didn't. I think there's going to be a little bit more going on there. And what I ultimately wonder, and what I think a lot of you are also wondering, is this going to be a one-off? Or is there the potential for Nintendo to continue this? Could they eventually do a similar one based on the Super NES? Could they do another one based on the N64? Anything, really, that they can run as a virtual console title, they could conceivably spin a version of this hardware for. And if they do, I think that will really explain a lot about Nintendo's thinking. I think this first one, the Classic Mini, is, for now, kind of an experiment on their part. I think they're taking baby steps, trying to figure out where they want to move things. And maybe the fact that they're doing this before NX comes out has something to say about it as well. But it seems like Nintendo doesn't want to place a big bet. I don't think they want to come up with this new vision for what they want to do and then go whole hog into it. And we've seen Nintendo do similar things before. For example, when the DS came out, they didn't immediately kill the Game Boy Advance. In fact, they said both of them would be continued in parallel. And only after it was determined that the DS was this major hit did they finally go and kill off the Game Boy Advance. So I'm wondering if we're not seeing a similar thing going on here, where Nintendo is trying to kind of feel things out, see what works, what doesn't, without risking a lot of money or without risking, really the biggest thing they've got going for them at this point is their brand, their image. Nintendo is a household name. People are going to think of Nintendo, honestly, I think, before PlayStation and Xbox. I think if you find anybody on the street, regardless of age, and you ask them, can you name a video game company, the majority of people will at first say Nintendo. And I don't blame them for wanting to take kind of a safe route. I really don't. Especially considering, as of late, their back has been up against the ropes. We still don't know much about NX. We don't know where that's going to go. We don't know what that's going to look like, and we don't know if it's going to work. It seems, based on the rumors, that it's kind of another risky thing, like what they did with the Wii. But doing those risky things is what helps them grow. And so, I guess I don't blame them for wanting to try and come up with the best way to do those risky things without putting the entire company at risk. But in any event, I'm really curious about it. I'm definitely going to buy one. I'm going to play the hell out of it. I suspect a lot of you are as well. Even if you've already got the console and the games, I think it's going to be curious and fun to have one of these that you can hook up to a modern TV and have it look good without a major investment in all the crazy like cables and mods and video scalers and all the stuff you otherwise need to get if you want to do this with original hardware. What I'm also curious about are your thoughts on the Classic Mini. What was your initial reaction when they announced it? How well do you think it's going to do? And what do you think that future is? Do you think they're going to come out with more, maybe other versions of it that have different games? Do you think they are going to just come up with a way where you can put more games on it? Does it have Wi-Fi or something built in and they're just not letting us know? Or do you think this is really kind of a one-off type of thing then we'll never see again? Shout out down in the comments. Let me know what you think. Also, of course, as always, let me know what you want to see for future topics. I may not get to it right away, but I definitely put it on the list to take a look at from time to time. So if you like the video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. Those help quite a bit. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at thisdoesnotcom. And as always, thanks for watching.